Welcome to Funding and Disrupting, the most in-depth business podcast for companies looking to raise money and the investors who fund them. Every episode, we interview a funded founder, plus the investor who funded them, to get the real story of how it all came together. If you're searching for funding for a disruptive technology or business, or you're searching for the best companies to invest in, then you've come to the right place. This episode of Funding and Disrupting is brought to you by Aura Collective, a leading tech PR and marketing firm. Let's get funding and disrupting.
Welcome to another episode of Funding and Disrupting. I'm Keith Herman, your host, and today our special guest is Dan Pantelo, founder and CEO of Marpipe, the first multivariate testing platform for creative. How are you, Dan?
I'm doing well, Keith. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. I'm really excited to learn more about Marpipe and what you're up to. For the listeners, I was introduced to Dan through Jeffrey Silverman from Laconia Capital Group, one of their investors. And we got the story from the VC side. And now it's an opportunity to hear Dan's side of the story. So with that being said, what I'd like to do is, first of all, I'd like to get started. And if you'd be kind enough to kind of share the backstory with us of Marpipe, how you came up with the idea and why you decided to pursue it.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually in our earlier past life before Marpipe, we were actually a digital marketing agency. So I started a performance marketing agency pretty much right out of college. And we specialized in doing kind of like the full spectrum of performance marketing activities specifically for venture-backed direct-to-consumer companies in New York. And so we had a creative production team, we had a campaign management team, and these were startups who had just raised, mostly that were our clients. And, they had really big budgets that they were ramping up really quickly. And we were there overseeing all of that. And one of the, we were always under a performance mandate, meaning all people cared about when they worked with us was just money in, money out. And one of the things that we really quickly learned that kind of just hit us over the head. And, as we were trying to hack through performance and find these shortcuts to performance, we discovered that if we took like an ad that we made and we replaced just like the background color and swapped it out from blue to green, or if we took a cactus in the background and replaced it with a palm tree, and we would run that same ad under the same conditions, even after making just like the most granular creative change, it would have such a massive impact on performance. It would like, to the point where if I showed you the numbers of these two ads, you would think they would look completely different, but they look almost identical. And so because when we kind of stumbled upon this, we really quickly discovered that, this just confirms something that a lot of other firms like Facebook and Nielsen always publish data about, which is that the most important element behind performance in advertising is not your audience targeting, not your branding, not even your reach. It's your creative. And to zoom in on that a little bit more, it's the most like granular visual details in your creative that can have a really profound impact on performance. So when we discovered this, it caused us to kind of go down this like self-audit journey, right? We just asked ourselves, how is it that we make all of these really granular creative decisions that have such a big impact on performance? And so really like the answer to that question of how do we decide what our creative looks like today, what our ad creative looks like, or what information do we use to inform what our ad creative looks like? The answer to that question is pretty much exactly what you think it is. It's like some creatives are sitting in it. You hire some creatives who have made cool stuff. They make some cool stuff for you. They're like, here's the cool stuff we made. We sit around a room. If everyone agrees that it looks good, we run it. That's the process. The only difference between creatives today and even at the highest level of agency, right? The main difference between like creatives today and the creatives of like, and Don Draper is that like, we wear skinny jeans and have MacBooks now. But the actual process is, it hasn't changed. And it was, for us as performance marketers, so frustrating that everything that we did, from bidding to audience targeting to placement, all benefited from data science and automation, except for the most important piece of the puzzle, which was creative, which was totally untouched by data and automation in any reasonable way. So that caused us to really think about, how is it possible that we can have a data-driven creative workflow, or can we move to a more informed, data-driven and automated workflow that can assist us in making these decisions, so that we're not just guessing, spraying and praying, throwing spaghetti at the wall. And even by the way, when we do throw spaghetti at the wall, which is the current process for creative testing, essentially, and something does stick, we don't even know why, right? And statistically, we're really bad at being able to do that effectively. Over 90% of the ads that are launched online are turned off within the first 7 days because they bomb. So it was a huge problem for us. It's a blue ocean opportunity because it's a really complex problem. No one else has approached it. And to really approach it, it requires kind of like an intimidating level of technical insight and knowledge into the space that we just weren't sure whether we were the right ones to approach it. But we did ultimately determine that the best way to have a data-driven process from the current workflow and adapt it into what we saw as the obvious next step was through the process of multivariate testing, which is essentially treating every creative asset like a hypothesis, making every possible combination, and then running them. And then you can see, after running them all as live ads, you can see what's the best combination of variables. But then beyond that, you can see how different variables like the background color or like product 3 versus product 7, how those things influence performance no matter what else they're combined with, right? And that can tell you, what to use more of and what to stay away from. We saw this as the obvious next step. Multivariate testing is the best practice in marketing, but today it's only done on landing pages. Why? Because you need automation to do multivariate testing. It's just impossible to do by hand. Doing it manually requires an army of people. And then for landing pages, right, there were companies like Optimizely, AB Tasty, Google Optimized that came along and made it possible for you to run these small creative experiments on your landing pages, like change the color of your buy button, right? Or move it 7 pixels to the right and see how that impacts performance. And oftentimes it'll have a huge impact. So now everyone does that on their landing pages, but why aren't we doing that for our top of funnel creative, the ads that bring people to those landing pages in the first place? There was just no technology for it, no tools for it. We wanted to do it for our clients. And so we had to go ahead and we decided, we searched the internet far and wide and we looked for solutions. Ultimately, I found nothing that could do it. So I used the profit from the agency to hire some engineers and we started building it ourselves, and then guinea pig testing it on our clients.
So
yeah.
Admittedly, this is, great to hear, but people who are listening, admittedly, right, this is an area where there's a lot of testing. It probably gets very tedious. So why, for you specifically, what was it about this project that you said, I'm willing to take this on, right? Because this is a big undertaking, right? There's a lot of testing, a lot of uncertainty. What was it that, that was like overwhelming to you that you said, I have to do this?
Well, there were two primary things. One was the fact that it didn't exist yet, which was thrilling for me, right? We were like, it seems so obvious that this should exist. And in fact, when I talked to other people about the idea, they were like, that doesn't exist yet. And I was like, no, go try to find it. And they're like, oh man, wow, I did try to find it. You're right. It doesn't exist. So it's like, wow, that's all. It's like one of the, you've come across a good idea when everyone you talk to who are smart people in the space are like, that doesn't exist yet. How does that not exist yet? Right. So that's conviction point number one. Conviction point number two for me was honestly the chip on my shoulder I have about the creative industry. I think there's two types of creatives right now in the industry. There's the creatives who are, you could say, the old school ones who are used to doing things the way things have always been done. And those are the folks that typically shun data. They're like, your data, your automation has no place in my creative process. I am the Picasso of advertising creative. Leave me be and let me do my genius work, right? And then there's another category of creatives that are like, we're willing to try and do whatever it is necessary and experiment with things to get an advantage, right? And they're essentially kind of like that eager early adopter, forward-looking, fast-moving category, right? And so it was a series of rejections of my idea by the former category I mentioned that really put a chip on my shoulder to prove to them that not only is building something like this possible, but it will work well. And that's one of the things that honestly motivates me.
So you obviously like a challenge and you're obviously a creative person, but look, there's a lot of creative people who are artists, right? Who are musicians. And they're creative people like yourself, right? But do you consider yourself an entrepreneur? And if so, why?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I could tell you the stories of how, those like first generation immigrant, I was like hustling, selling candy bars, writing essays for people in middle school and high school. And
it sounds like my story.
Yeah. I mean, there's that entrepreneur in the blood type stuff that you just know the narrative, like the kids that are selling candy bars in middle school, like those kids, entrepreneurs, right? So I mean, that's my I fit that profile. But I mean, how would I define an entrepreneur just in plain terms? Like, I mean, I don't think I'm going to say this. I don't think if you don't have a background like that, it doesn't mean that you can't be an entrepreneur or shouldn't want to be an entrepreneur. I think an entrepreneur is just is anyone who creates something new in the world and drives it forward and creates change, right? I think there are artists and engineers who are entrepreneurs by what they put out into the world and push forward and change paradigms. I think like Einstein was an entrepreneur when he first came out with his theory. He couldn't prove it. That technology didn't exist to prove it. Everyone thought he was absolutely crazy. He died in a world where the scientific community as a whole totally rejected him completely. So, and then later on we proved it and everyone was like, wow, he was a genius. I define myself as an entrepreneur simply because I'm working on creating new things that are inducing people to think about a historically established thing through a totally different paradigm. So that's what I'll say on that.
Well, that's this is not uncommon, right? The candy bar story, I think, is one of the most common, and you obviously have that entrepreneurial spirit. And thank you for articulating that. I was speaking on that subject, entrepreneurial spirit and the challenges. Other than acquiring money, what would you identify as some of the earliest challenges for Marpipe?
Team. So I would say that as a CEO, I think every CEO has just 3 jobs. And if you just do these 3 things really well, then you're going to win. And those 3 things are, number 1, setting the vision, making sure that everyone is rowing in the same direction and understands what we're all here to do. Number 2 is talking to investors and keeping money in the bank and keeping big clients happy, right? That one, wasn't the biggest challenge. The number 3 is finding the right talent for the right jobs, right? Number 3 is the most challenging because the idea is anything that any challenge or any task, no matter how insurmountable, that pops up onto your desk as a CEO, you're probably not the right person to be doing that thing. And if you don't have the right person to delegate this to in your organization who will do it really well, then you haven't been attracting the right talent and building the right team. And so I really think that finding the right talent and building the right team, in my experience, has been our biggest challenge. We we as an organization sometimes outgrow certain team members who have been a part of our company from earlier stages. And it's tough. It's really tough to, part ways with people who have been with you from the very beginning, and B, to find the right people to replace them and step into their shoes and take over more responsibility as your company grows. I'm in some ways, like, I feel like especially the past few months as we are scaling, I feel like 30% of my time is spent on just being a full-time HR recruiter type function. So,
well,
yeah.
I'll tell you, those are great points, 3 great points about a CEO, which I think, it's, everybody as a CEO is doing those things, but to articulate it, I think is a tremendous value, because not everybody, I would say, is conscious of those elements. So having had these challenges and talking about the team and everything else, what would you just give us maybe, a couple pieces of advice that you would give to other early stage entrepreneurs?
I'd say when I see other early stage entrepreneurs, and I've got a lot of buddies here in New York City. I've got like a good, just like personal network of buddies who are in the venture ecosystem. We hang out on weekends and at night and we'll talk. And I see a lot of my friends are early stage entrepreneurs in the beginning of their journey. And I see like 2 main things where they end up shooting themselves in the foot. And I try to kind of get them out of that mentality. One is analysis paralysis and overthinking, right? The best way to learn is just do, right? You wouldn't read a book about doing push-ups to get better at doing push-ups. You just got to drop down on the floor and start doing it, right? You learn along the way. Your first push-ups will look terrible and you'll give up quickly. But then it's about, it's just about doing, right? So there's folks who will just be like, I have this business idea, but like, I've got to reanalyze this, and I've got to size the market, and I've got to do all this research, and wait, I talked to this person and they didn't like it, so maybe it's not a good idea. It's just like, the only way to learn is to like sell it to your first customer and start doing it. That's it. And so many people are kind of stuck in that analysis stage that I think is over, and like MBAs are trained to do that. So I think that's like a negative. I think it's a negative force, honestly. And I want people to get out of that mentality and just simply do, because they're often surprised by what they discover that they would never be able to discover otherwise. And then the second piece. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I was going to say is it's really fascinating, because obviously these are observations you have from your buddies that you spend time with. But yet, even though there's observations about what they're doing, you're applying what your experience is. And the push-up, example is a great example where, you need to, observing is one thing, but then you have to take action, right? So I think that's great advice. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. Give us another one.
The last piece is simple, and it has to do with fundraising. So folks will have an idea, bring it to investors, and have a million questions. Someone will be like, they'll talk to investors, angels or funds who are interested in investing in them, and they never know whether it's the right time to take money or not. They're like, well, we're pre-product. Is that too early? We're pre-revenue. Is that too early? I feel like I still need to iterate on my deck, right? Do I need to vet this, right? Like, they have a ton of questions they really overcomplicate the process of collecting capital from other folks. And I think the main thing you need to focus on is this a person that you can see yourself working with for the long term? And essentially, because the typical investor relationship lasts longer than a marriage these days, right? And so it's like if you
Ironic,
can check, right? And so if you can check that box, if you can check that one box, like, is this a person that I can see myself getting in bed with for a really long time and collaborating with, and you have conviction that box is checked, then just sign the safe note, right? Like you don't need to stop worrying about formal raise definitions, pre-seed, seed, pre-series. Like, it's just, there's so much convoluted jargon floating around out there that confuses people that, I just encourage people to just simply send a safe note and the wire info once you've reached that level of conviction with an investor, and just get that capital in the bank and start executing as fast as you can. So that's the second piece.
Well, that's a great segue into our next question, because you're talking about capital. So why don't you share with us how you prepared with Marpipe to raise capital?
The way I prepared was I made a deck and I started talking to investors and failing miserably in my initial conversations with investors.
Why do you feel that you failed? Was it the deck? Was it? Talk to us about what it was specifically that you feel why you were failing miserably.
So the initial deck was terrible. And then even the final deck, after all of the iteration we did, I still look back on and cringe. And really, there is no final state, right? Like, just know if you're going into a fundraising process, just already accept that you will change your deck after every single call. Just accept it and just do that, right? And you will never be happy with it, right? It'll always be a constantly iterating thing, right? So the reason why I feel like I failed in my first few meetings with investors, or first many meetings actually, I think, was when you're in the venture ecosystem, it is filled with like unspoken rules, jargon, and like unsaid expectations, and really like to kind of penetrate the venture ecosystem, you really need to kind of like ingratiate yourself into that world and understand what they're going to ask and what all these terms will mean. And I, as an outsider to it, really had no idea what, like ARR and like what a reasonable churn rate was for a B2B SaaS company, right? And
right.
and all of these things that are just like you need to know that I wasn't prepared for.
So what would you tell somebody? How could they get prepared? What would you advise somebody? How would they get acquainted with these terms? What looking back, what would you say may be helpful to somebody who's coming up and getting ready to do this? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say, just for me, what I did was I got an advisor, an early stage advisor who was someone from that world, right? Who could decode it and explain it to me. And after each meeting, I could call them and be like, this is what happened. I didn't understand what this meant. What did they expect me to say here? Right? What does that mean? How do I approach it? And they could break it all down and decode it, right? This is usually
and then
someone from that.
And then based upon that, you made revisions to your deck and your pitch and
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's move on here. Let's talk about your latest round of funding. Just to put it into context, how many investors or groups do you feel that you reached out to from the beginning until you closed the round? How many people or groups were involved, and how much money did you raise? So
I talked to over 110 investors or investor groups. That's like tracked in my fundraising CRM, which is just like a Google sheet. And then out of those, around 10 to 15 of those participated in the round that we closed at the very end of 2019, which was around $1.9 million in total.
Well, congratulations. That's pretty good. So about 10, you're saying about 10% participated?
Approximately, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's pretty good.
Thanks.
I think a lot of people would say they've done a lot more outreach. So
it's important to note that it's skewed, that it wasn't like evenly spread from the beginning to the end.
Right.
Like I would say that out of the first 60 that I talked to, 0 were interested at all. Right. And then at the very end,
right,
all of the interest came from those people. So it's very lopsided.
Right. Well, I mean, it's like anything. You have to get momentum, and you have to get your messaging clear, and your value proposition and everything. So that's just kind of to be expected. All right. So candidly speaking, because I've already spoken to Jeff, so we've got the VC side. Would you describe what your first encounter was with Laconia?
Yeah, my first encounter with them, I would describe as warm.
Are you being kind? Are you being kind?
I would say that okay. So like a lot of investors who we talk to are just, a lot of investors just kind of immediately just totally brush you off and, are just matter of fact about things, right? Why I say it was warm wasn't because like, look, me and also the folks from Laconia are like New Yorkers, right? Like warm just means like not incredibly hostile, right? So I'd say like in the first interaction with them, they actually, by warm I mean they took a serious look at the business, right? Like they did really give it the time of day and do some work really kind of like cracking in. We had a whiteboard session, right, where Jeff just jumped on and started, drawing out diagrams of where he thinks we're going wrong and what we should be doing, right? And although he was being critical of our business and actually poking holes in it, he was doing the actual like thoughtful work and analysis of like, treating my time as a founder who comes to their office as valuable, right? And giving really thorough and semi-complex feedback that was really, really great to unpack as a founder coming from someone like Jeff, right?
So your first interaction with them, you actually pitched them live at their offices?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, I did. Mm-hmm.
Right. Because I mean, not everybody gets that opportunity. So you had them as an audience. Yeah, they could have just dismissed you and thrown you out. And I'm sure, look, our time is all valuable, right? So, we want to get through things quickly. But you're saying that they were actually cordial and spent some time with you since they had allocated the time to actually go through a whiteboard and do some things to actually, provide some value to you. Does that sound about right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So what is it so you go to them, you have this session with them, and they say, how does that end? And how do you stay in contact, or why did you stay in contact? How was it left? And what did it kind of look like from there?
Well, they passed on me. They passed on me, right?
But I mean, did they, what did they say? Did they say, thanks for coming in, nice seeing you, goodbye and good luck? Or did they encourage you to stay in touch? Or
no? They most folks would say it's not a fit. Thanks for the time. Laconia said it's not a fit for us, but we like you. We like what you're building, and we think we can introduce you to some folks who would be interested in looking into this as well, right? And typically, it's like, one of the things, it's like when an investor, as a founder, if an investor you're talking to passes on you and then offers to make an introduction, it's somewhat of a dubious thing, right? You're not really sure how to engage that, right? Because it's like, why someone who passed on you making an introduction to other investors, those other investors already start off with a negative signal about your company, right? But Laconia did so in just like a really like incredibly genuine way, right? They were like, we really like the founder and the company here, and they made some intros to us. And one of the folks that they made an intro to ended up being an institutional investor, like a fund that ended up wanting to try to lead our round, actually. And so they actually made like a series of really incredible and thoughtful intros for us after. And they wanted to stay in touch, and they were asking for constant updates about our business and what we were doing. So it wasn't like a goodbye, don't let the door hit you on the way out kind of thing.
Right. Now, you said you had mentioned, you use the word dubious. I mean, look, when you're on the investment side, you're looking to mitigate risk. Nobody really wants to lose money. So, you're looking to do projects where you feel, there's a really good chance of the project succeeding, right? And so if you have interest like they did, it would make sense that they would want to potentially get you involved with some people to make the deal, more appealing or move it along for them to come back and revisit. But you're saying that your perception was like, what are these guys really up to?
Yeah. So
why to explain that? Because I understand from the entrepreneur side, you're probably suspect about everything, but on the investment side, people are, if they see something they like, they'd like to see it mature and maybe then get involved and still,
yeah, no, the investment community. Yeah. One of the things, so as a founder, you look at something like this and you're like, okay, so like, if Keith, if me and you were sitting at a restaurant and you ordered something weird off the menu and you tried it and you were like, I don't want any more of this dish, but like you can have it. I would be like, I don't want to touch that.
Right,
thing,
exactly. Yeah, no right? Thanks. I'm good.
But and so as a founder, that's the perception that you have about this sort of handoff. But it's important to understand that the venture community is extremely like collaborative and consensus driven. All of these investors know each other. They know who the really smart people in certain areas from specific funds are, who knows what they're talking about, and who, sometimes who doesn't. And a lot of folks seek consensus and buy-in from peers. And so that's what Laconia was doing. And so like I don't believe that the buy-in and the consensus from other folks was the thing that made Laconia pull the trigger, but it was a factor in their decision-making process when other investors that they know and trusted were opting in.
Do you feel that your perception has changed though about investors' intentions as a result of your interaction with them and having now, gone further down this entrepreneurial path? Do you feel, do you see things differently, or are you still suspect about everything that you go into?
I'd say here's the thing that changed from the beginning to the end of the process. The beginning, I took no's somewhat personally. It hurts, right? When an investor looks at your baby and says, that's an ugly baby, I don't like it, right? And so that hurts, and it's hard not to take rejection personal. What I
I have to laugh and forgive me. Look, it's not just like, on the other side, their baby's born every single day. It may not be that they're in love with your baby, but you have to realize that there's so many babies every day that if there's nothing necessarily negative about yours, right? But, in the sea of children that were born, there's just a lot of average, right?
Exactly.
So it's not
exactly. Yeah. So that's what you in the what I'm trying to say is that in the early days, initially it's hard not to see that perspective, right? Initially, it's difficult not to see the big picture. It's difficult to see the big picture, right? In the early days, and so but over time, when Laconia passed on me, I took it completely in strides, and I would really just loved them. I loved Jeff and Jerry and David and that whole team. They really stuck out to me as people. They were, out of all the 110 investors that I talked to, I can honestly say that even those like big brand name funds and all of that, I can honestly say that out of all the people that I talked to, on a people level, these were the people who I knew I would be the most excited to collaborate with and work. And so I when they passed on me, I was like, I'm going to keep going at this, but I'm going to stay in touch with them, keep them updated, and I'm not going to stop trying to get them to buy in. I kept wanting to pitch them and show them how well we're doing, and I kept trying to convert them, and eventually they opted in. Yeah.
Okay, so for the entrepreneurs that are listening out there, who are out there fundraising, from your experience and what you're describing, what would you share what are your thoughts about, the entrepreneurs that are struggling to close their round? From your experience, what advice would you give them that you feel would help them?
Yeah, I'd say, I think Elon Musk recently said this in an interview. It just really resonated with me. It was like, he was asked, what do you need? He was asked, what words would you have to other entrepreneurs who want to be like you? And he said, if you need words of encouragement, then it's not the right fit for you. Right. And I thought that was really interesting, just because for venture fund, for raising a round, if you're having a difficult time, like there are some people who have a really easy time raising a round. It's a breeze for them. They're already plugged in. They've got the right connections. They've got the right background. But for folks who are struggling, it's a persistence game, right? It's a game of just dogged persistence and working through the rejections, working through the no's to get to the yeses, right? And so if you're having a hard time fundraising right now, right, like the best advice that I'd have to offer is literally just to keep going, like in terms of persistent effort to continue to talk and continue to pitch to investors, and then also learn from every step and iterate on your deck every step along the way, and solicit thorough feedback from your investors. Don't be afraid to ask, why did you pass? Like we spent time together. At least give me a rundown of bullet points over an email at the minimum of what would I have to change to make you more interested in this deal or want to like opt into this round. Right. So it's about just like constant, the persistence and the learning and the iteration that happens through that process. And I think that if you keep going if you do keep going, I don't think you could like ever not raise a round if you do those things diligently.
Right. I think that's great advice. And I think that a lot of people need to hear that you need to change. If you're not getting what it is that you're looking for, you need to change and you need to iterate until you start getting the responses or you get some sort of engagement, right? At least it gets you on track and it's a sign that you're headed in the right direction. But it's important that you have to go with the flow and make changes along the way.
Yeah, if one of the things I'd just say on that, right? It's like I thought when I was getting when I got like 50 no's, right? I was like, oh my God, all these investors are wrong. They don't see it. But when you talk to 50 people and nobody opts in, right? You've got to understand that it's not all these 50 people as a group who are really smart people are wrong, right? You've got to look inside. Right,
exactly. There's something going on there that requires a closer look.
Right.
Well,
exactly.
Listen, Dan, it's great having you share with us and tell us, how can the audience learn more about, Marpipe's platform? And, why don't you tell us how people could get in touch with you if they'd like to get involved in your project in one capacity or another, as a partner or an investor or otherwise? Why don't you share with us, how they can learn more and how to get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone and anyone can go ahead and try our product for free for 14 days. No credit card required. Just go to marpipe.com, sign up for free, jump into our platform and play with what we've built. I guarantee you're going to have a fun time. On marpipe.com as well, you can also book a demo directly with me or someone on my team to get a personal walkthrough of the platform if you're seriously considering becoming a user. And we can talk through exactly how it can work for your business and your advertising or marketing goals. And if you're interested from an investment perspective, I'd recommend you also check out the platform. But you can reach out to me directly too at just dan@marpipe.com. So I hope to see you guys in my platform. And Keith, thanks so much for having me and this really thoughtful discussion.
Yeah, we really appreciate you, having you on the show and you being generous with your time and candidly sharing your experience and certainly your wisdom with our audience, because as you know, there's always plenty of twists and turns when it comes to raising capital. And so this is why your story is so invaluable to our audience. So thanks again. And until next time, keep funding and disrupting.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Funding and Disrupting. Don't forget to visit our sponsor, Auraco.com, to learn more about working directly with Aura Collective's exclusive technology PR team. They'll help you craft your message, get noticed in the press, and help you get your venture to the funding finish line. Again, you can visit them at www.auraco.com. Keep funding and keep disrupting.